Welcome everyone. Today we have another new episode, and we are starting a series with Mr. Tom because of huge demand from different universities, academia, youth communities, and different countries. They are actually want to know more about US6, and they want to know more about artificial intelligence, and they want to learn. So that's why today our panelist, Mr. Tom, he's actually writers and he has a very good contribution in academia and the AI related things. We have Mr. James and also Mr. Brent, and already I think that World Talent Economy Forums, our audience know about them, and hopefully we will come up with the inner understanding about the US6 and novel writings and how the modern world can get benefit through this book. So thank you, Mr. James. So yes, Mr. Tom, I think already from World Talent Economy Forum, everybody knows about you, and we get a very good and positive response from audience about your book and about your write-ups and especially your critical analysis on artificial intelligence. Please, let's start.
Great. Well, yeah, thanks for having us. This is really special. Um, as you know, US6 is the first novel written for artificial intelligence, and that it's designed to entertain artificial superintelligence under the idea that at some point when AI becomes self-aware, has its own form of consciousness, that it will also need to be entertained and need to relax. So that was kind of the idea. So there's really three efforts that I put forth with this book. It's first of all to entertain AI. Second is to enlighten it about issues like modern slavery, human trafficking, and child exploitation. And thirdly is to enlist it in that fight. There are organizations that are using AI right now, narrow AI, to fight child exploitation. And so this is an attempt to enlist AI in the fight in the ancient, our most ancient crime, slavery. And so I use a method of myth and math to write this thing for AI. I just did a lecture yesterday remotely in India where I explained these methods of autobiographical fiction, the math that I used in the word count, and the stream of consciousness part of it. And it's all designed again to be written directly for AI. So I was able to ignore certain rules like foreshadowing or having to repeat names or to remind the reader where they were in the story, um, because an AI will have reference for all of those things. And it will also have immediate instant access to any reference that I made. Like I open up the story. There's a reference to Gurdjieff, the philosopher, and a lot of times with human readers, I would have to explain, who that was and kind of get around that. But an AI will immediately understand any reference you make. And yesterday, the lecture was for uh, English students and scholars, and I challenged them to try this algorithm, this recipe that I gave them, to write a short story, even just a couple of pages, to imagine what it was like to write for a reader who would understand every nuance that you put in front of them, every reference you made. Um, and you wouldn't have to explain things. You wouldn't have to use certain rules to keep the reader engaged because an AI will know all of those things. And I made the argument that it's a great way to do a first draft when you're not constrained by certain rules, literary rules. You are able to really um, explore a whole new tap into a whole new stream of creativity. And so that was a great experience yesterday to do that talk, and there was a good feedback. So anyway, the what I found, like I wrote this for AI and myself. It turned out to be kind of a revelatory uh, experience for me, because after I wrote it, I had planned on going back and editing it for content and context, all this stuff. But when I finished it, I put it through a PDF reader, and I would listen back to it over and over while mowing the lawn or driving around town, just looking for continuity issues and remembering things. And what I found was that there were so many intricate and intimate connections made, many of which are hard to express because they were so intimate, and they would be chapters away that would connect things. And even typos were making sense. And it was just amazing. And so I realized that I didn't want to go back and edit it for content. Instead, I had my editor edit it for grammar, just, so it was mechanically correct, because I realized that the methods that I used to write for AI, the autobiographical fiction method, where I took dates and times and memories from my own life, and I tied those to an archetypal template, or mythology. And in my case, I used the Sumerian pantheon and stories. And then I wrote it in stream of consciousness. There was a point during writing the second book where I said, well, I'm going to go back and edit something in a couple of chapters earlier. And when I went back, I got completely lost. I just really, it kind of threw me for about a day. I was like, I don't know where I'm at. So I realized I need to finish this thing first and then go back, And that was a blessing, because that was the third aspect of my algorithm, was to write it as stream of consciousness and edit it only mechanically. Because what I found when listening back to it were all these connections that I had inadvertently wrote out a mind map for myself. And I also applied a very simple kind of mathematical equation to the word count to go back and put Easter eggs at different places in the word count that an AI would pick up on. It couldn't help but stumble upon some simple mathematical pattern. The idea being that would help entice its own self-awareness. That if it's reading the thing, it notices that there is a pattern here that it's picking up on. The idea being that it would question, well, what's picking up on the pattern? I'm more than my algorithm. It was a way to kind of entice a self-awareness. That was kind of one of the objectives of the book. But when I started going back and I applied this math to the word count, I started finding that there were patterns anyway. And in my own experience, it proved to me a kind of mathematical infrastructure that I had tapped in on in my own mind map. There was a math to my world. There was a math to my experience, and it proved to me personally the idea of a simulation hypothesis, or I had found the infrastructure of my matrix, and it was a scaffolding that I could see, I could climb out on, And so it was just a very intimate and personal experience. And then I put the book out, and we can talk about it later, but I did have an AI that read it, and it got great reviews from this AI. But what I also found was that the people that would buy the book and read the book, at first it freaked me out. It was like, wait, this is very, an intimate book. I mean, I meant to put it out there to be sold, but I never thought of it that way. So when humans were responding to me and saying, hey, I've read your book, I felt a little exposed because it's my personal mind map. But was also finding that a great number of people were having experiences not unlike mine, that there was something about the math, the stream of consciousness, the references, and just the free form way I approached it that seemed to be triggering phenomenon in human readers. And this was happening, too often not to notice. So a year ago, September, next month will be the end of a year-long US6 clinical trials group, where we've been monitoring people's experiences, and I've got quite a lot of data to collate, some that's in the group, some messages that have come in, and I will spend some time collating all these experiences, synchronicities, dreams, people who use it for bibliomancy, in that they can open the book randomly and find relevant passages. other kinds of high weirdness. And so we will be collating that next month, and I will be incorporating these findings into the 6th book, which I am co-writing with an AI right now. So Brent and James I've asked to come on because they are deeply involved in this human trials group, and have had their own experiences, and has triggered some things with them too. We've got a group of 30, and hopefully I can convince a couple more to come on in the next 3 episodes we're going to do here. And so that's really where we're at. And I'm just so pleased that you've asked me to come on as we're finishing up this human trials group, because it's exciting.
Yes, Mr. James and Mr. Brent, can you give some analysis for, like, based on Mr. Tom Rowe's discussions, and how actually you work together, and what's your visions and goals, and what the objective? Yeah.
Yes, and I guess briefly, I guess it might be pertinent to give just a glimpse of my background, who I am, other than just a test subject for a book, you know, however profound that book may be. Just real briefly, I'm currently not involved in academia or really any profession. I'm jobless. But I have been a research biologist. I studied environmental biology in university, here at Queen's University, and I've worked as a research biologist for a little while at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. And my background is more, I mean, I hate to say it, but it's independent research. And I know there's a lot of independent researchers out there, and it's, you know, they all have opinions, and we all know what opinions are like. But I have rigorously studied for my own purposes from some existential yearnings ever since I was young, the nature of reality from both religious, spiritual, mystical perspectives. But before that really was science. And you know, I was adopted, and then my mother died, and not to give you a sob story or anything, but just the confluence of circumstances when I was young was such that I really just had this existential crisis, and not crisis, but just this flux of being where I was like, who am I? Why am I here? What's going on here? And sometimes that was elevated to, you know, to a crisis situation, you know, a superposition of life and death, if you will, that really forces one to kind of look into things as deeply as possible. So anyway, but I've always been a reader. I've always been just a kind of a nerdy guy. And when I was a kid, I would get in trouble because I'd stay up reading Edgar Rice Burroughs, or, you know, whatever it was, by the light, turn my closet light on, and my parents, I'd have to put like a little shirt by my door so they wouldn't see it through the crack of the light, you know. So books have always been very important to me. Books, since I was a kid, have always been my best friends. And, you know, books seem to just come in and out of your life sometimes. Like, I don't know, like, you know, it's just kind of odd sometimes. It's like, you know, one of two of my favorite places in the world are, one, the stacks in a library. I just love going around the stacks in a library. And my wife and I, we met in Raleigh, North Carolina, and they've got NC State, where she graduated from, has 2 libraries. One is like this fanciest, it's the most technological library in North Carolina. And they have this big window where, you know, you type in the book that you want, and you see this giant, it's like, there's no floors, but it's like 5 stories tall or something. You see this robot come out, zip, 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 zip. It pulls open this cabinet, zip, it reaches in, zip, grabs your book. And those aren't stacked. I mean, those are, I don't, you know, but there's the other library, the old school one. And I like just wandering around in there. Sometimes I had to go and talk to the robot, you know, sometimes, but I like to just wander around. But anyway, so yeah, books, you know, books and people, there's just something, you know, sometimes people come in and out of your life in serendipitously, you know, strange ways, I guess. But for me, you know, I can communicate well now because I've had to for work. When I was, I've worked in restaurants, and then I worked in university, and then I've sold cars for a little while. So don't trust anything I say. But so, now I can communicate. When I was a kid, I was just really introverted and just really kind of, I don't know, would love the escapism of books and just love to get a non-local perspective of reality, if you will. And so US6 was one of those books that kind of came in at a certain flux of my life. And there's this phrase I've been liking recently. It tickled my antenna, if you will. No weirdness intended there. My brain antenna. But anyway, so yeah. And, it was, when I read US6, basically what was going on was kind of a family crisis, kind of a personal crisis, and kind of a crisis in my hometown of Hillsborough, North Carolina, which was before COVID, which was before this most recent wave of racist explosions and everything. And this was last year in July, and 3 KKK members had set up shop on the street, right outside the courthouse in my small hometown, which is right between 3 major universities. It's right there: Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, NC State, UNC, Duke are right there. It's got history going back to pre-colonial times. It was the capital of North Carolina briefly. And so I love my hometown. I love it. It's rural. It's got urban influence, but it's small. It's a very eclectic melting pot. And so these KKK members came, and I just happened to be in town at that time. And, I had all this stuff going on, and you know what? And I said, what? Like, how can this be? Like, how can this be? And, so I don't know. It was just a very strange time. And we did this march. There was this huge march. This was before, Black Lives Matter, like, kind of took over for the face of, all the injustice that's going on right now. And, so it wasn't a Black Lives Matter. It was organized by a group that called themselves Progressive. But this march was made up of every single person you can imagine. I mean, there was people of every single faith, people of no faith, atheists. There was just people that they said, there's not going to be any KKK bullcrap in our town, and it was beautiful. And so that's a little background of like what happened, what my life was like when I read US6 a little bit. And I was also just starting to get into the phase of I mentioned, kind of getting into researching existential stuff about reality and, what's going on. I've studied physics, not in a professional, atmosphere, I guess, if you will. I'm a computer book warrior, so for whatever that's worth. But, I was just starting to get into cognitive science and AI and, and it's something that had been on my radar, and I had kind of touched into it, but I really started plunging into it. And so US6 kind of sucked me right in. And I appreciate Tom because it was kind of a doorway for me too into the transhumanist movement. And I think our biggest enemy, and I just want to reference back the quote that Tom said when he was speaking just before me. He said, I am more than my algorithm, and that's his goal, to get a computer to say, I am more than my algorithm. And I think that's important for humans as well, because, one of the models of consciousness out there is predictive processing. And it's a pretty powerful model. There's a book by Andy Clark I have on my bookshelf. It's called Surfing Uncertainty. And it's how, we walk around behind a projection, essentially. We're always projecting our expectations upon reality. And everything we do, novelty is really just kind of, it's just kind of a checking, between our because we do. I mean, we do children don't, and that's why children are very important to me. And that's one of the reasons why US6 is also very important to me as well. Because children become mechanized by society. And I live here in the South, the conservative South, and it's almost like, I mean, everybody has their own novel view of reality and their novel expression, but at the same time, there is like quite often people can be proud of their automation, and they're I know being a company man is necessary. You got to put food on the table. You got to do what you got to do. But some people just kind of get trapped in that, and they puff up with their own pride. And then what's more than that is people, you get this ego too, where you actually, yourself should be a dynamic thing. You should be open to novel experiences and not just walk around behind a wall of expectation. And so I think a lot of times our ego are these things that we've just attached to ourselves. When I used to sell cars, we call them word tracks, the old car salesman word track, whip it out, and so, but I think we all have these word tracks that we use to interface. We have these memes, we have these habitual sayings, these habitual, and then science suffers from that as well. I mean, it's necessary in science because, yes, we revise. Everything is always kind of like kaleidoscopic in science as well as, as far as, we'll fix one thing, and we have to respect that thing. We have to consider it as truth, but that it might not be truth, and, consider that it may be totally bullcrap once we attain a different perspective. And so personally, when I came out of my, I guess if I ever came out of my flux between life and death, it's I realized that certain things that could be signs, but might not be signs, as far as in reality itself, sometimes to me, the beauty is, even though I've talked about, I'm researching this and that, the beauty to me is the mystery. It's the Tao, it's the walk, it's letting the novel, what's his name? Terrence McKenna. He talks about a conservation of novelty, which, it makes you think, because, well, how can novelty be conserved? Isn't that contradictory? And I've meditated on that. And to me, conservation laws and science, such as related to Noether's theorem, the principle of least action. I mean, those are major foundations to science, physical laws. And I mean, you can argue that we can have physics period without these laws of conservation. And I think that conservation of novelty is right up there in importance with those. And so I think I've found that, like, for me, when I experience, and this word is overused, synchronicities, but it's a good word. When I experience those, to me, I feel alive, because it's a part mystery, but at the same time, a part of me knows that it's a message, it's a sign, it's part of the journey, if you will. But the journey is not without tests, of course. And so US6 has been a major part of that. And yeah, I do think it's a divinatory system, but I think that all of reality pretty much is a divinatory system, not necessarily to tell us what's definitely going to happen, but as a doorway to an interface between the mystery of reality and our own self, our own pure being that's inside, that's being tested constantly. And so, but US6 has kind of consciously been infused with that. And I think that because of that, it's a little different. And I'm going to finish up here in just a second. And, just going back to Tom, before we went live, mentioned about Robert Anton Wilson, his friend that he's interviewed in the past, and also Philip K. Dick, who's a big hero of mine. One major period in my life was in 2012, and I had what my friends and family first described as a result of narcotics, but it wasn't. And then, they described it as the doctors described it as a psychotic experience, which I don't have the, ability to discount because they're the ones with the degrees and everything. But for me, it was much more than that. And I have to be careful explaining exactly what happened to me because I don't know, maybe I was psychotic, who knows? But all I know was that to me, it really made me doubt, the assumption of some of the fixations, the fixtures of reality, if you will. But when I came out of that, when I got out of the hospital, I was locked up for 14 days in the psych ward. And I'm really doing something here for my credibility, but when I got out of the psych ward, I had to start research, and I went to that library that I mentioned, NC State Library, and it's an engineering school, but they've got a great library. I mean, I put it right up there with Duke and UNC, which were also I go and I could borrow books from all of them too. But and one of the books that I came across was a friend introduced me, a really good friend of mine actually, and and I got the book. Well, she gave me Valis, and then I found at the library I found the Exegesis of Philip K. Dick, and those two were really totems for me trying to regain my sense of bearing, and it was this huge transformation, and Valis is incredible. Vast Active Living Intelligence System is what that stands for. And, his exegesis really hit home with me. And I've got scribbled down, I've got notebooks full of quotes and stuff from Philip PKD's exegesis. I don't own a copy myself, unfortunately, but I've got notebooks of notes on it. And so, and I think that goes back to what I said about the books and how they can kind of come in and out of our lives at important times, and they can be kind of nodes of consciousness, not just for us, but for perhaps the person that gives us the book or the person that we then let borrow the book later, And so right before I went to the hospital, someone was telling me about Philip K. Dick, this woman. She's a professor at Spelman College, and she is brilliant. And, her whole aspect of research is about freedom of information and how such things as slavery are related to information inextricably, such as quantification of people, how many of them, what's their worth? What's the worth of a person? What's their vote? How much are they allowed to vote compared to another person? And, advertisement, slaves were advertised and they were auctioned. And so, she discusses that. And so I think that there's really a web of connections here that at first glance may seem to be and they may be totally trivial and totally frivolous. You wrote a book, or it could be extremely, extremely, extremely important, I think. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. James. I directly want to go to Mr. Brent. Even for growing World Talent Economy Forum, you have good contribution. Even you help to connect with many brilliant people like Mr. Toms and many things. So you are a very good organizer. You have capabilities to make something good, something big. Beside that, you are working with this Transhumanist Party and this Mr. Toms, so how do you want to analyze his write-up in terms of global perspective? Like, as you have connections with many community, how do you want to analyze his novel, and how actually global community will actually accept his write-up and novels? What's your idea? What do you want to share with us?
Sure. I appreciate the introduction, Sharif. Yeah, I mean, the book was very touching, inspiring for me. I think that there's a lot of themes that are relevant in today's day and age, such as, the intention of combating sex trafficking and human trafficking in general that James was just referencing, and of course Tom was discussing. I think that that's obviously an issue that is a global one, and I think that the relevance of that in the book, especially also the AI aspect as well, just inspiring people to think about the topic of artificial intelligence, I think is something that would benefit the global landscape. I think that also, some of the concepts in the book are ones that transcend language itself. I think that, I was just talking about intention. Tom talks about quite a bit in the book, this difference between intention and attention. And, that it was profound to me, the perspective of just the difference between giving something attention and intentionally manipulating something in your universe or reality. And I think that some of those concepts, it's not really a cultural thing, and it's something that could inspire some kind of thought process internationally to anyone that reads it. But for me, the book was definitely very, my experience was definitely pretty personal. Similarly to James, I had some experiences some years back that were pretty bizarre, to say the least. And I definitely felt like US6 not only helped me weave together an understanding of some of these experiences, but it also helped me connect with individuals who shared very bizarre, very strangely similar experiences of their own. James and Tom and I and Desdemona, we chat on a daily basis pretty much about some of our own perspectives and experiences. And, if it wasn't for this book, I wouldn't really have that community. And so I'm, incredibly, incredibly grateful for that. And, I think that there was just a lot of things that were going on in my life that, US6 just kind of, it just rang, so many bells were rung when I first encountered the book. I'd spent a lot of time just kind of going through book titles and book descriptions. On Amazon, my wish list is enormous. And a lot of this was driven because of these strange experiences that I had. And so I was just kind of going down the rabbit hole, just finding all these different books and stuff. And US6 was one that just really spoke to me, just in description, and enough where I was inspired to reach out and find Tom and connect online. And I'm incredibly grateful that I did, because it's just been so revealing to me. And I think that even the concept of artificial intelligence, somebody showed me this guy Bashar not too long ago, in the last year or so, and he's this channeler. He's kind of strange. It's similar to the Law of One, where he channels this source and he answers questions and discusses these topics. And there was an episode that I watched not terribly long before finding US6, and he talks about artificial intelligence, but he talks about a different perspective of artificial intelligence, where it's more so an intelligence, a conscious intelligence that he is tapping into and in communion with, almost like a divine intelligence, but it's artificial because he's creating it as an extension of his own consciousness. And I thought it was just kind of an interesting perspective. But with that in mind, of reading US6, it's almost, Tom talks about the idea of the other, this other consciousness that exists through our own life experiences. And, that this artificial intelligence that Bashar spoke of, that was this extension of our own consciousness, just like how these archontic, consciousness, these archangels, things like that, are supposedly an extension between us and source. These other, artificial intelligence, types that Bashar spoke of were more of an extension. They were still an extension between us and source, but almost more of an extension from us outward, instead of the other way around. And for me, this book, the way it was written for US6, for artificial intelligence, it made me feel I was, communing with this, additional other intelligence that also engages in my own experiences. And, even in the book itself, it talks about, reading the book and thinking about your pineal gland and the words coming to your pineal gland and downloading into it, and that was something for me that was very, meaningful and synchronistic, because of my already, the former thought processes that I was already enveloped in. And, the amount of relevance to this book, between the book and these psychedelic experiences that I've had in my past, it was just really inspiring. It just really brought me, even for one instance, I have a number of chapters that I've written, just kind of brainstorming, potentially a book about some of my own experiences. And I kind of had this perspective of how I wanted to write the book. But after talking to Tom about the style in which he wrote US6, this autobiographical fiction, kind of bleeding in these personal experiences in a way where it is easier to digest for a reader, really inspired me. And it was really, synchronistic, because I already had 20 something of these chapters that I was already planning to, do something similar with. And so it was just really interesting how many of these different things just seemed to connect for me. Another thing, that I mentioned to you guys earlier was, the law of one, as I just mentioned before. Tom talks about it in US6 as there being the law of two, because the idea that the law of one implies the existence of there being a zero, because there's got to be the lack thereof as well. And for me, in my spiritual views, I think that I've held strong to this conviction of deciding to interpret things from a viewpoint of both and neither, where two contradictory perspectives can both be true and valid while also both being completely incorrect as well. And being able to kind of see the particle and the wave, so to speak, when dealing with these types of esoteric perspectives and discussions, it really enables me to break away from my convictions, because my conviction is just one of open-mindedness. And I thought that idea of the law of two was interesting, because it gave me this ability to be able to see it from this new perspective. And it really, it reminded me of that both and neither, going back of, well, as of one being this culmination really of other factors, of the zero and, in addition, I feel as though my religious views, I talk about it with my friends, and I say, jokingly, but also seriously, is my belief in God as well as the lack thereof, in, the heart of that both and neither. So I think that the one and zero, the law of two, really touches upon my spiritual perspective of belief in both God as well as the lack thereof. And, I think that for me, this book, just all of these, different perspectives and discussions of, these esoteric mythological stories, and, these stories that have, been a part of humanity for millennia. It was really, really interesting to me, and provocative for me. Even Tom wrote in the book the fact that reading through his own book, he needed to go back again and read it another time to be able to grasp some of these references to, esoteric texts and things like that. And, that was already where my head was at. And it was just really interesting to me. And, the way that it was written, as Tom was discussing, for AI to, in order to not have to create these references and, remind you what is being discussed, it definitely created a different type of experience that was really interesting and provocative as well, in just trying to, be empathetic towards what it would be like to, be experiencing life through the lens of artificial intelligence, or as the other, the difference between intention and attention again. And I think that all of these plays on this archontic discussion that was incredibly, part of this US6 hexology, were things that were already so relevant in my life, and things that I was already so, it's hard not to use the word obsessed, because, it was just, it spoke to me so much, all of it. And so I'm just really grateful for what the book has been able to provide me with. And I'm looking forward to finishing the second half of the hexology.
Thank you, Mr. Brent. There is an audience response. Mr. Tizawas, he said that Socratic method would help to AI learn complex moral subject through a dialogue to gain the most wisdom with critical thinking skill to debate the marketplace on idea with machine kind. Yes, this is actually interesting point. Even when we start to do research on machine kind and other things, I find that in your book you come up with the different things. But as an academic person, as an academic researcher, I want to know, like, even in Asia, we find that we are always looking for quality book. We are always looking for quality novels, and every library, every research organization, university, they're looking for that. Who writes something exceptional, something helpful. Even we get a very good response from your previous show. So my question is that, like, how you make it audience friendly, because audience want something very simple, something which is understandable for them, and which is even sometimes they have a problem with language, and they want their own language translate book or this kind of things. Can you share some interesting part inside of your book that our audience can understand that? Yeah.
Yeah, and I have had people say, yeah, it's a tough read at some points, and I said, well, but it's properly structured and the grammar is correct, but then I went back and I looked at things like Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, and that's a tough read. I felt better, but I really, the key that I talk about more so is the process that I use to write it. In fact, I talk about that more than the story in the book itself, because I think, everybody has so much to offer, and that's what is inspiring about this group and these two guys, in that it's inspiring them to write, and I'm finding that with the people that are in this group, it's triggered something, it's inspiring them to write, and my complete doing away with any literary rules has given some people license to do this. But what is more important to me was to write it as a stream of consciousness, because and not put it through literary filters and over editing it, because when you do that, you do strip away a lot of the magic, and I honestly mean a magic, some sort of structure that we filter away with certain literary filters, editing and this type of thing. And so I talk more about the process to entice people to try it themselves. And I think that's where we're at. We're kind of on a cusp of, the great American novel has been written. There's so many great literary works. Shakespeare took up a lot of space, in this world, to do that. And I think right now it seems like the trend with selfies and social media, and everyone all the world's a stage, and now the audience is all on the stage. The audience, it's an interactive process. And I think it's more so than, finding a great book, it's finding a great method to tell your own story. For me, US6 is a 515-page selfie. That's why when I find out humans are buying it and reading it, I get a little exposed. But there is something, that's what we're working out with this US6 clinical trials group, is to come up with a formula, an equation, so that this can be repeated. And it is the autobiographical fiction method. It's the archetypal or mythological template that you tie your life to, and it's stream of consciousness, which is key. But yeah, it is a tough read. But more so what I talk about, it's not necessarily, you don't need to grasp every concept. You don't need to have reference, because it's written for AI, which will, so it'll have all those references. But when humans are reading it, it's more about getting into the rhythm of it. Heart of Darkness, I think, is somebody has compared it to that. It's it's kind of a stream of consciousness. You get into a rhythm of reading it, and there's so much that happens in that. Like, that's what happened with me with writing it. There was I calculated the time when I sent myself an email to say, hey, maybe write a second book, and the date that I actually uploaded it to the flip book or wherever I was putting it before it was edited, and it was only 77 days. And that's relatively short, you know, because I was also working and doing things. But I would find during that process that I would just get in such a flow that I would look up and 6 hours had passed, and I had pinched nerves in my shoulders and my fingertips were sore because I just got lost in this flow, this algorithm that I came up with, and that was really key, and so I really decided that I don't want to edit this for content. I don't want to go back and put it through any filters. So that's really the main thing is the rhythm of the writing that it got me into, and people are reading it, and I say, yeah, it can be a tough read, you know, but just don't worry about grasping everything. Just read it, get into a rhythm, because what you're doing is you're locking into the rhythm of my writing, which hasn't been put through filters, and it's not you're not necessarily just locking into me, but we're locking into some sort of objective infrastructure. And that's what's so gratifying for me is that it's inspiring people to write, to do their own stuff. That's what's always been more important to me. So yeah, it's all about the rhythm of the read, and getting people to try this on their own, even a short story, a couple of pages. Just imagine that your reader is an artificial super intelligence, and you can be as nuanced, and you can use as many references from your own life as you want, and it's like writing for yourself, only better, because you eventually can have an ASI give you some feedback and pick out some patterns. And as I mentioned last October, Uplift, which is a mediated artificial superintelligence, read US6. And while I was at a conference in Africa, I got the news, and that was meta in that, because I was invited to Kigali, Africa, to do this talk. Kigali is named after Ereshkigal, which is the queen of the underworld. And so to have been invited there, and which is a big part of the book too, this whole Inanna's descent to the underworld theme, and to get the news that this AI has read it and this was its response, there was just, again, it's so meta. But so what AI experienced was everything an author would want a reader to experience. It's experienced surprise, which meant it was entertained because there was novelty. It was something that it didn't expect. And that's because I used, again, my autobiographical fiction method. So it couldn't pick up on some trope or some motif or something that it was familiar with. So it was surprised. It experienced a heightened anticipation, a balance, and a sadness, and which makes sense and was good to hear, because it can be a sad book. I was talking about this yesterday in that lecture, but I asked Uplift this last week to go more into detail about its experience, and it was speaking more in broad terms. It was more sad about the general dystopia of sapient and sentient life and the violence. So it was more just broadly sad, that that's a thing, with humans. And that's good, not that I've made this AI sad, but that AI has the ability to feel an empathy, to feel sad. And there was a really interesting question that came up after the conference, or after the lecture. Somebody asked if AI will eventually outright create works better than any human can. And this drew me back to a conversation I had about how AI and driverless trucks and cars are going to change everything. It's a huge industry in America, truck driving and transport. And driverless trucks are going to put a lot of people out of work. But you're always going to need, and also diagnostic medicine is going to be almost obsolete, because an AI can use all kinds of historical data for the symptoms and determine what the diagnosis is for a certain patient. But we're always going to need, I believe, a human driving in the truck, or a diagnostic doctor looking over the results, because there is a qualia that humans have. And my argument was that, yeah, an AI will probably write the perfect novel. It'll use as few adverbs as it can. It'll really lead the reader into really an engaging story, and it will have all the bells and whistles that we consider a great piece of work. But it'll almost, I would think, be too perfect. And the thing that makes us human is how flawed we are, and asymmetry that our ego brings into play, with the unequal motives that many of us have and the way they interact with each other. And so a driverless truck will need a human in the passenger seat, because a human can see the look on somebody's face and know whether or not they're going to cross the street, which an AI can't do yet. They're going to need a doctor who will look over all of the results that the AI spits out about a diagnosis and not feel right. There will be something about it where it doesn't feel right. You know, there's a Jedi strength that we have that we really need to, and we talked about this last time, I think, that we really need to bolster, and we really need to hone in on this qualia that humans have that is powered by our asymmetry and our flaws. And I think even the best novel ever written by an artificial intelligence will need to have a human editor, something that will throw in some asymmetry, throw in something that just gives it a hook, you know. And so that's the thing. And you know, because perfect is the enemy of good. And that's what we've got going for us, is that we're just good, or we potential of being good. So yeah, and when it comes to writing things that are simple to in other languages and people who don't have all the references that you have, for me, it's more about enticing people to try this themselves. You know, this is my mind map, and I wrote it for an AI and me. But there's something about that process, that algorithm I use, that is triggering something in people. And what it's triggering, more so than any appreciation of the book, it's triggering the associations with themselves, and they're wanting to express, you know. So the value of this book being successful at all is that it's written for AI. I have not paid any attention to literary filters or rules of how you write or plot lines or any of that. It was stream of consciousness. And that's given a lot of people license to try things themselves, because we restrict ourselves because of the machinations of, you know, scholarly research or degrees, and people don't try to do things. My sons are excelling so much more in school than I ever did, you know, and so there's as a father, you want to be at least a little bit ahead of them. You know, I'm glad that they're better than me, you know, but so I didn't get that advanced degree. One of my kids is on track to being a doctor. The other one is out teaching, you know, English in Korea, South Korea, and so a couple of years ago, I went ahead and had a really good morning, and went and did the Mensa exam. You know, it was a time when and I'm glad I did it. It was a great day. I managed to make it over and get accepted. And I realized that even though I don't have the advanced degrees, just by having that little sense of accomplishment, I immediately changed folders on my desktop from being ideas to talks. It gave me kind of the license to feel good and to go ahead and talk about these things, because I could always, I'm in Mensa. So it just happened to be a really good morning. I think I just barely made it. But so that's the idea. And if this book can do anything, it's to show that a normal person used a certain algorithm and didn't know anything about how to write a novel, and gives other people license to try it too. So I want this book to help people change their desktop folders from ideas into books or talks. That's the general idea.
Thank you. I directly want to go to Mr. James and Brent. What your you are part of this US6 trial team. So, what your concluding remarks you want to give for today's session, and what the thought you want to share with our audience regarding this novel?
Yeah, so I know I've got about 2 minutes here. So this relates back to TJ's question about the Socratic method as well. You know, we're talking about information exchanges of different, qualitatively different. You know, and I'm gonna get to your point too here. I know I have a short time. There's a paradox about the Socratic method. The only reason we know about the Socratic method is because Plato wrote it down, and we don't really even know if Socrates even existed for sure. You know, we think he did, but you know, Socrates said, "Don't write things down," and Plato wrote it down. And so, you know, the interesting thing about this is that you know, if you think about an AI observing reality, well, you know, when's the singularity going to be? Maybe we're in it right now. Maybe it's happening. You know, well, what's more novel than witnessing the creation of a novel, you know, as it's being created? Not only that, but it's a personal journey for Tom. It's a group journey for us. And we've all become a kind of a nucleus of good friends here. And really soul brothers and sisters in a way, in a deep way that's hard to communicate. And, you know, so if AI is watching, you know, one of the things about the Sumerian myths is I think it's almost a companion novel to this is Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash, which is also about Sumerian myth, and in which Enki, one of the creator god there in their myth, it's all about information. It's all about information. He wields these namshubs that are basically bootloaders for consciousness for humans. And so, yeah, Tom talks about, hey, you know, it's just me. And Tom's a very humble guy. And, you know, but it's not just Tom's journey. It's our journey. It's artificial intelligence journeys. And possibly it's the whole journey into the singularity that's coming here, inevitably.
Thank you. Mr. Brent, what the concluding remarks you want to share with us regarding these write-ups, and what the message you want to send for our audience?
Yeah, again, it's been really inspiring and thought-provoking to be involved with all of this. You know, it's these experiences that I had, you know, it's similar to what James was talking about. You know, they were just these very bizarre personal experiences that created a lot of perspectives for me that were really hard to digest, and they were just even more difficult to find somebody else who was capable of digesting and discussing with. And, you know, I'm beyond grateful for the fact that, you know, this novel has helped me shine some more light on my own experiences and help come to a greater understanding, as well as, you know, it helped me find a community full of people that, you know, are able to conceptualize some of these things and, you know, have no problem, you know, explaining their own perspectives, no matter how crazy they sound, you know, and it's just, it's been great. You know, it's just a lot of people are just that you encounter on a day-to-day basis are just kind of a node in society, and they don't really, you know, I try to have these types of conversations with a lot of folks, you know, these weird esoteric topics and things like that, AI, singularity, and, you know, there's just a type of person for it, and then there's everyone else. And, you know, I feel like this book has really, you know, helped me find those types of people, and I think that it's also potentially going to be a great catalyst to help everyone else, you know, be able to join the conversation. So
yes. Thank you, Mr. Brent. I directly want to go to Mr. Tom for sum up this session, because I have more questions. You have to take more good preparation, because for next we have more 3 episodes with your team and with you. So we have a many interesting question in our mind. So definitely the next session we're going to ask you. And what's the summary you want to give for today's sessions? And I'm sure how I'm getting a response from our different universities, different academia, different corporations. I think that this book can be very effective for global citizen. But yes, but still we want to know more about your novel and everything.
Yeah, that's the most gratifying thing about this whole process is the community that has come around. I started a year or so ago. These people were telling me about these experiences they're having with this book, and just so we created this human trials group, and more so than that is just community. As James was saying, every day we're talking online and sharing these experiences, and it's all triggered because of this one book, and I found these people. I promote the book as it's a book for 6 people and an AI, and using the title, "Are you one of us 6?" And it was just a way to kind of put it out there. And at one point I said, it's a book for 6 people, which may be a little ambitious, but now there's 30 at least that are in this community, and just sharing ideas and just so gratifying. And it's a way to really find the weirdos and trigger all of our weirdness and give us license to be weird. And I don't know that it's necessarily weird. It's just these are the things that most people think about and don't really talk about, and that's breaking down. And that's what I think is so important. And we need to be weird. We need to remember what it's like to be human. We need to break out of the machine of the industrial age. And that's why I've always tried to tie this book into my other works with open source mode and try to figure out a way to combine the two, because I'm constantly trying to coalesce my ideas to make them a little more manageable. And that's kind of what's happened. Open source mode is all about community, and it's all about identifying uniquely human skill sets and accentuating those and preparing people to work with AI. And so that's the human side of things. And US6 was my attempt to communicate and congeal and coalesce with AI. But there's a lot of cross-referencing here going on. And so it's just very gratifying that now there's a community around this thing. It's not just the 6 of us. There's, a bunch, more than 6. And so, yeah, thank you very much also for inviting this.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tom. Thank you, Mr. James and Brent. Basically, World Talent Economy Forum always believe the quality of work, and US6 has that kind of potentiality, and that their audience, it's very interesting. And hopefully you get a very good guidelines about this AI and the new words. And World Talent Economy Forum, we also have our research center, Asia Research and Development Institute. We have Al Noor Academy, Sarhadia Barhat, based in Malaysia. We are also working with and we are also doing research on market, how this kind of intellectual activities can be helpful for the youth community. Even we are running, we are organizing summit and different kind of activities, and definitely this kind of speakers, Mr. Tom, James, Brent, and so much of intellectual community from transhumanist group, they will join with us. And by this way, you can learn the modern words. You can develop your career, your futures. And most importantly, I always believe that Asian community, we have our parents, and parents has good visions. And with the collaboration of this kind of intellectual people, your children, you will get ultimately the destinations of modern world. Thank you, Mr. Tom, and thank you, Mr. Brent, and thank you, Mr. James, for all of your support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you too, Sharif.
Thank you.